The government PIP policy is defined more at the moment by its casualties than by its ambition. And the controversial reforms to the PIP, to the personal independence payments, which are set to remove support from hundreds of thousands of disabled people across the UK, are nothing short of, I think, criminal. To tell somebody one day that they can have support and then to withdraw it on a whim the next is deceitful, and for that to be done by the government, I think, is damaging. If it's not unlawful technically, it probably should be. The rhetoric is about saving the welfare state, but the reality is that the burden of these cuts will fall disproportionately and cruelly on older people with musculoskeletal conditions like arthritis and chronic back pain, people who are not work shy but work worn. And there is another way of dealing with this, than that is to provide support to help people to bridge that gap between indolence and contribution to the workforce. The centre of Liz Kendall's plan is a change in how disability is assessed. And under the new proposal, applicants will need to score at least 4 points in specific categories related to everyday activities, washing, dressing, cooking, to qualify for support. What sounds like a bureaucratic tweak is in fact a seismic shift. Official figures reveal that 79% of those claiming PIP for back pain will lose out. So too will 3/4 of arthritis sufferers. And the government is not targeting malingerers, it's targeting people with knees that grind, hips that seize, vertebrae that compress after a life of labour. Curiously, the rhetoric about getting young people off benefits and into work doesn't match the data. Only around 25% of claimants in their 20s will be affected, whereas nearly all claimants over 40 will lose support. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, these conditions, most often demonised in tabloid headlines, are less affected. In fact, the Resolution Foundation points out that this reform is oddly backward-looking. It cuts from the older, more stable claimant base rather than curbing the rising tide of mental health claims among the young. It's a paradox of both logic and compassion. And this isn't just a policy decision, it's a performance. It follows this long Labour tradition from Snowden to Healey to Brown of sacrificing sacred cows to impress the bond markets and win the praise of broadsheet editors. Keir Starmer and Liz Kendall insist that this is a Labour cause, a moral mission to preserve welfare for the truly needy. But when 250,000 more people are pushed into poverty and just 7,000 lifted into work, we have to ask, whose morality, what cause? Because the backlash within Labour has been fierce. Over 100 MPs have signed letters urging a rethink. Mayors, charities, trade unions are queuing up to condemn what Scope and Mencap call the plan that risks condemning more disabled people to a life of poverty. And we have to be clear-eyed. The government's own data suggests a third of cancer sufferers, half of those with multiple sclerosis, a quarter with cerebral palsy may lose out. These are not fringe claimants. They're not anomalies, they're the backbone of the system. Moreover, the reform is not just about cost, it's about reclassifying who's deserving, not based on need, but on the severity and visibility of their suffering. The quiet pain of back injuries or the degenerative joints is being judged less worthy than conditions which present more dramatically in a clinical setting. Stephen Bryan, chair of the Social Security Advisory Committee, called this a resetting of the social contract. It's a return to the old dichotomy, the deserving poor and everyone else. A whiff of Victorian moralism dressed in modern fiscal logic. And let's not pretend these reforms are accidental. The cruelty is deliberate, or at least accepted as collateral for political gain. Labour hopes to show that it's tough enough to govern, but a policy which strikes hardest at those with the fewest defenders is not tough, it's cowardly. Yes, welfare reform is a legitimate debate, but to conduct it at the expense of older disabled people while using their suffering as a signal of seriousness is a betrayal. We don't need to play some sort of bashing things on the head with the disabled. hoping that they reframe their suffering to meet arbitrary thresholds. We need a system based on trust, not traps. And if this is indeed a moral mission, then we shouldn't measure it in the pounds saved, but in the lives preserved. And that's not the language which we're hearing from the government.